welcome to Michigan Football at the Voice of College Football. I am one of your post-game hosts, Desmond. I am here with my partner, Dre, and here with the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mark Rogers. Before we get started, please like and subscribe, not only to the video, but also to the channel. We are trending towards 5,000 subscribers, which is amazing, so thank you for that. While you're at it, also subscribe to Mark's main channel, The Voice of College Football, and also subscribe to his Discord on Patreon, where you can be a part of not only college football talk, but also NFL talk 24/7, 365. Thanks again for joining us. Mark, how's it going? How you doing?
It's going pretty well. And like I mentioned to you and Dre the other day, man, I don't know if it's the interest in the quarterback situation or that you guys are this amazing to get like 5,500 views on a Hawaii post game at what, midnight? What time was it by the time they had a delay? I forgot about that. They had a delay. I got to admit, I didn't watch one play of that game. So you guys had to sit through that game and then go on late night. So
that was something I am not used to, and it was just a very late night, much later than I'm used to. Yeah, so that was late. I remember actually Dre and I went golfing the next day, and I'm getting ready, and look at myself in the mirror. I'm like, man, just the bags under my eyes, because we had a very early tee time. I think like 7:30. So I was out of the house about 6:30 a.m. So we wrapped up the stream around 1 o'clock, I think, and so it was it was late, but it was good. It was good. I think everybody's excited, especially after the performance JJ had, and Michigan 2-0, and then also hearing, I mean, our viewers, which thank you to you all, let us know real time that Harbaugh had named JJ the starter. So a lot of good things going on. So Dre, how we doing, my man?
No, doing really well. Doing really well. It was definitely a very long night. From in terms of what we could have talked about with usable material, pretty much had enough after the first half. But because we like to be thorough with our analysis, we watched the entire game. And look, you take it with a grain of salt. You try to stay as healthy as possible in these type of games, and you handle your business. So overall, I'm doing pretty good. I'm happy as a Michigan fan right now. Definitely in a much better place than a lot of other schools after this past weekend. Some schools like Nebraska is now looking for a new head coach. So going pretty well so far.
Nebraska just minding their own business and just catching strays on the Michigan channel. That is, you just had to go there, huh, Dre? Had to.
Hey man, got to mention what's going on in the backyard.
That's a difficult, very difficult situation. And since you brought it up, I've got a question for Mark. Here's kind of my thought and theory on it when it comes to firing a coach this early in the season. Is essentially, my thought is, if you felt like after I think they played week 0, so I think it's been 3 games, yeah. So if after 3 games you've seen enough to fire said person, couldn't you make the argument that you probably should have just fired him in the offseason?
Yes, you can make that. Scott Frost did enough or didn't do enough, depending on your perspective, to get fired and be released from his position before these 3 games. Absolutely. But I do think that these 3 games were justified in firing him as well. So they went the route of reset. Brian Kelly, 2016-17 reset, clear the coaching staff. You need new coaches, coordinators, reduce salary. Jim Harbaugh, 2020 reset, coaches, and so forth, even though what Brian Kelly and Jim Harbaugh had accomplished at those schools far surpassed Scott Frost. Mm-hmm. They were coming off bad seasons, and they got kind of we're going to call you on the carpet and tell you you're sticking around, but you're going to have to make some changes but with Scott Frost, it obviously didn't work. So he's the common denominator, especially when they've got Mark Whipple coming in from Pitt and other capable coaches on the coaching staff that have succeeded elsewhere. So this is a Scott Frost issue, and rightfully he's gone.
And part of me wonders, in just obviously we'll never know, but if they did move on from Scott Frost, if any of those big name hires, if Nebraska had a shot with those, in which I don't think they did. But and here's I guess the plus side is, because I think for some of those coaches you may have overpaid for their services. I mean, you look at James Franklin; he was able to kind of finesse, if you will, or leverage the current situation into a very hefty contract extension and a pretty significant raise. Brian Kelly also, same thing. So I wonder, had they been in the sweepstakes, essentially, so to speak, would they have ended up overpaying for a coach? Now, who knows? Because at the end of the season, they may still have to do that. But I just wonder if they potentially had any benefit with that, of potentially not overpaying for a coach. Because let's say the top 5 coaches are off the board, right? That's in whatever order, but Brian Kelly, let's say Lincoln, the next 3 coaches, whoever you want to list. Well, you may have had to overpay, even let's say if you got number 6, maybe his salary probably should have been, for sake of discussion, $7 million. Well, you may have had to pay him $10 million to get him to come to Nebraska. And like I said, that still may end up being the case anyway at the end of the season, but it just kind of working through this exercise that's a little bit unexpected. I just wonder if Nebraska, I mean, just made the right decision at the end of the day. I think they did, but timing and it's just an odd situation. Just very,
well, I mean,
it's
look,
odd.
it's an odd. I mean, I won't say odd. It was an abnormal hire to begin with in terms of a unique situation, a unique opportunity to bring, at that point, very similar to Jim Harbaugh, the golden boy back to to the university. And I think very similar to Michigan, they tried to give Scott Frost every opportunity to prove himself and to prove that he should be their long-term option. And it was so egregious, I think, these first 3 weeks that they had no choice. I mean, they lost the first 3 games of they went 1-2 weeks 1 through 3, including week 0, if I'm not mistaken. And I watched all 3 games. They should have lost the second game. Well, they were losing the second game versus, I think, was it Norfolk State or something like that? Or I can't remember. I just remember they
South
had like
Dakota.
South Dakota.
Much matters, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they were struggling at home versus that team.
Yeah.
And they pulled it out late in the game, but there's a point in time when they were struggling against that team as well. It was so egregious the last 3 weeks that they just didn't really have much of a choice. So I think they planned on initially giving him this 4-year. Hey, new quarterback, Adrian Martinez is gone. Adrian Martinez was a big, excuse that you can use. Hey, you got this quarterback that just creates all these turnovers, and last year they was in so many tight games, but they couldn't just go with hump, do the turnovers and stuff like that. Where I think they ran out of excuses, and they finally, like you said, Des, and he was the common denominator. They just had to make the move.
You didn't compare Scott Frost to Jim Harbaugh, did you?
He did.
Initially,
He did.
in terms of what both guys meant to the programs coming in.
Okay, coming into the job.
Coming in. Oh, no, not at all. I mean, look, Jim Harbaugh, as hard as I've been on Jim Harbaugh, sort of some other, fans, he has had way more, excluding last year, way more success at Michigan.
Yes.
Jim's biggest problem has been, up to last year was winning the bigger games, beating Ohio State, winning, ranked games on the road, getting the Big Ten title. But, he, from the first year, I mean, he took Michigan from, I think, 5-7 to, I think we were 10-3, including the bowl game win. So, no comparison there. But in terms of what the two guys meant to the program, definitely similarities.
Yep.
That they are. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. So wanted to kind of jump right into our Ohio State segment. This is new. Dre has implemented this into the channel, into the culture of Michigan football at the Voice of College Football. Just talking about the parallels of, you know, the Michigan football team kind of having their Ohio State drill every day in practice, where they focus on what Ohio State's doing and playing against their scheme, practicing against their scheme, so that Thanksgiving weekend they are ready to roll. So the Buckeyes won, I think it was 45-12.
Yeah.
Yes, 45-12. Arkansas State looked a little more like, I think, the offense that everyone really expected when it comes to Ohio State. I think CJ threw for over 300 yards, 4 touchdowns. So really, really a good win, and that point total a lot closer to what we all expected. But any takeaways? I'll go to you first, Dre. From the Ohio State game.
No, they took care of business. I mean, they should beat Arkansas State. I think one thing that it actually had nothing to do with Arkansas State game, and I brought it up to you, Daz, after the Notre Dame collapse versus Marshall, is how valuable was the Notre Dame game week 1? And how valuable is it? What is Notre Dame? I mean, that remains to be seen. They're 0-2 right now. They were a top 10 team coming into the season. So, how much did we learn truly about, how much do we know about Ohio State's defense? Are they truly better, especially when it comes to the run game, stopping the run game, So, I know after week 1, there were a lot of people who were like, wow, you gave up 10 points to Notre Dame. Your defense looks really, really good. You fixed it, but hey, look, maybe not so much. So, maybe that jury is still out on that. So, I said this, Daz, last week after the Notre Dame game. I still feel really good about Michigan having the formula. Not saying I can guarantee it's going to work, but they have the formula in the personnel to attack Ohio State's Achilles heel, which is their rush defense. Control the time of possession, attacking their weakness in terms of the run game, and keeping their offense off the field. And I still believe, as of now, that is an area that Michigan can exploit, even down at CBUS, to win the game in November. And Ohio State, as of now, even after these past 2 weeks, still hasn't shown me that Michigan can't take advantage of that,
Well, as someone who I am about 99% sure watched that game, Mark, what were your takeaways from the Ohio State-Arkansas State game?
It's funny that you picked this week to make that statement, because that might be the first Ohio State game I haven't watched in my life. I didn't watch one play. I haven't seen one play from that game. There's just too many good games going on, too much what I'm committed to doing here.
I left the 1% out there, so see, I'm good. I'm okay. I'm good.
1%, and I DVR'd it, and I'm like, yeah, am I really going to watch this? No. So Dre's premise is that these are kind of the same two teams coming into the season, that Ohio State has issues to shore up and to prove, and that Michigan does not. Because otherwise, Ohio State played a more quality opponent by far than what Michigan's seen.
Well, I mean, sure. I mean, like, Notre Dame is definitely better than Connecticut and Colorado State. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, I mean, how really good is Notre Dame? I mean,
they're definitely better than those two. I think.
No, I understand.
Sure
I understand. I'm talking about. I think one thing is clear. One thing is very clear is that we're 1A and 1B in the conference thus far. I think anybody who's watched the Big Ten, look, we could all throw the Big Ten West in the trash, especially after this past weekend. My goodness. So I mean, if we just focus on the East.
You are quick to throw some shade. You are very quick to throw some shade.
Look, Iowa can't find the end zone. Wisconsin just got beat by Washington State at home. Nebraska just lost their head coach. Northwestern, dude. I mean, it's just pointless. What we're doing here? Let's just omit the West. That's JV. So let's focus on the varsity side.
It's
So
still early. Listen. You got to go to Kinnick, okay? So don't tell
okay,
me
look, hold on a second. Now,
that
first
that's
of all,
JV.
don't do
You've got
that.
to go there, and it might be a night game. So
First off, don't do that.
don't you
Don't
tell
do that.
me.
That's not fair.
Oh,
How
it's
was I
definitely
supposed to
fair
know?
because that's what you
How
were
was I
telling
supposed
me.
to know that Iowa was going to come in with an historically inept offense? Okay,
I
I
don't
think.
think I think if Iowa came in with the same offense they had in the Big Ten championship, I don't think the results would have changed. My feelings on that game wouldn't have changed. It would have been the same.
Look, man. Look, it's not my fault that they can't find an end zone, no matter that. Hey, it's clear. Forget it. The point is that in terms of the East, we're on a collision course once again. I believe that the winner take all goes to Indianapolis between Ohio State and Michigan. I truly do believe that. So when you look at both teams, um, I think that we are the clear distinguisher, and I believe that Michigan's strength last year, right, was their rushing attack. I believe as a tandem, they got the well. I like Williams and I like Trevion Henderson, but I feel pretty good about Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. I think CJ Stokes showed a lot of promise too. And I think that's an area that they can still attack Ohio State. And Ohio State has some proven, not saying they can, that they have fixed that area, right? Have they gotten mentally tough? I would have thought, if Notre Dame was truly a top 10 team, that was a gritty win uh, they had at home versus them. That was some adversity. They had opened the season off at home under the lights. Notre Dame was a quality opponent. Notre Dame kind of punched them in the mouth a little bit. Ohio State just didn't have their way. It had to find a way and grind it out and get a win. Well, now, I mean, how really good is Notre Dame to begin with? So, look, it's just, I guess I have more questions this week about Ohio State than I did last week, which it should be the opposite. You should have a little bit more of an understanding what a team is. The more the season progresses, not less, right? So, I don't know. I mean, look, I'm not like I said, I'm not guaranteed some win to see bus right now. But I'm feeling pretty good about Michigan's chances for sure.
Okay. I think it's early. And honestly, I probably think that I would say there's probably a similar amount of questions for both teams because I think we know who Ohio State's offense is. I think we know that. I also think we know who Michigan. I mean, really, the interesting part is I think we also know who Michigan's offense is. We've seen obviously with JJ being the starter for 1 week. I think we can all agree it looks very different. So I think as we move on and progress in the season, like you said, Dre, questions will be answered. It's starting to get to the point where we wonder when are we going to know who these teams are. Before the season started, we spoke about it on the channel that Iowa week we're going to know who Michigan is at
Yeah,
that
so much for
after
that.
that game is over. Now, I mean, you're probably going to push that to what Michigan State week.
Yeah,
I would probably
yeah,
argue,
for sure.
around that time. I think Penn State might be before that. I don't have the schedule up, but I mean, even with Penn State, I mean, I think they have a decent amount of limitations. I think with the new element of Michigan offense of pushing the ball down the field, I think you're looking at potentially a high scoring offense to where I'm not sure Penn State can do those things. Is veteran of a quarterback as Sean Clifford is. I mean,
He's like 30 years
he
old,
just
so he should
he
be a
just can't
veteran.
seem to put it all together every week. Like it seems to be even in a even keeled performance. It's just never or rarely seems to be very high level. So I wonder about that. But I mean, if it's not Penn State and Michigan State, I mean, we're not going to know who Michigan is until Thanksgiving weekend. And that is a wild thing to really think about is, well, we don't know how good or bad our team is until the last regular season game of the season during rivalry week. That's crazy. That's crazy to think about, but potentially we could run into that.
Well, I've been thinking about. I think there still is a chance of Michigan proving how that they are really good despite their opponent. I mean, if they're going in week to week and especially deep into their Big Ten schedule and they're crushing their opponents, like if they're crushing Penn State, they're crushing MSU, they're crushing Maryland, they're crushing Nebraska, like, and they look clearly like the better team, then I would be able to take something from that, like, okay, you know what, we're on another level, right? We're not just good, Big Ten good. No, we're clear. Like there's like a huge gap between us and our contemporaries, right? So that will show. Then I'll be able to kind of pull something from that. But it is interesting. You know, think about Clemson for years under Dabo, right? You know, the ACC most of the time, most years, was really down. You know, while Clemson was on their run, and you know, one concern that people would have was how really good is Clemson, and when they get to the playoffs, they're going to get exposed. And most years they were not. You know, whether win or loss, you know, they competed very highly in every playoff game they were in. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think they've had any bad playoff performance. So, look, I think as long as Michigan goes out there and they're proving that they are heads and shoulders better than their opponents, then there still is something you can pull from that. Unfortunately, like these first 3 weeks, their opponents have been so bad, right? They're not even average, Des. That's been the hard part, right? You know, you go out there and you crush look, I can make jokes on Iowa all day. And Corey, I'm sure, is having a lot of fun on his post-game shows. But
he is not having fun. I will
yeah,
tell
I'm
you
sure.
that.
I'm sure. But, you know, if Michigan goes out there to Kinnick and they win, gosh, I don't know, 35-10, and that sounds like too much given 10 points for Iowa right now. But let's say 35-10. I mean, that is a heck of a performance. You know, that is really saying something. So, hey, you know, like there still is, even with a weaker schedule for Michigan to prove that, hey, maybe we're special. But at the end of the day, in terms of winning a national championship, and no, I don't want to put the cart before the horse. None of us, including your Crimson Tide, Des, want to touch Georgia. So it may not even matter to begin with.
Well, before you start talking about national championship, I want it to be very clear to all of our viewers that are on the channel. You said that if all the breaks go Michigan's way, national championship was not the ceiling. So I want that to be very clear. Don't get on here telling our viewers that national championship is some potential. I believe I was the one who said that.
I don't want to touch Georgia.
Yeah, but that's fine. But you said national championship. So I just want that to be clear. National championship was not anything that you mentioned in Michigan's ceiling before the season started. Am I correct?
I mean, yes, but I didn't think
there's no but. There's no but.
Okay,
yes,
I mean,
that is correct.
No, I didn't think that was possible. I mean, look, to win. But here's the problem, like, because historically, since the college football playoff started, the 1 and 2 seeds are typically there's the 1 and 2 seeds, and then there's a gap. Then there's 3, and then there's another gap. Then there's 4. Right? Outside of that 1 year, I think Ohio State or Alabama won it with the 4th seed, right? But for the most part, it's pretty much how it is. So, and a lot of that has to do with like just the overall, not just the raw talent of the starters, but then also the depth, right? The depth that these Georgia and Alabama teams have, that just Michigan and Ohio State kind of, Cincinnati, Oklahoma. Washington that 1 year, you know, we just don't quite. Notre Dame.
Did we just put Ohio State in the category of Cincinnati, Washington, and who else?
Well, I'm sorry, Mark.
Ohio State's recruiting at the level that Georgia and Alabama are recruiting.
Okay, well, look. Besides the year with Urban Meyer, I mean, y'all haven't hosted up that crystal ball. So I mean, look, I'm talking about who's
they
finished the job
by
now.
4 touchdowns in the playoffs 2 years ago. They have the second most players in the NFL right now to Alabama. They do not put Ohio State with Oklahoma.
With Cincinnati? That's crazy.
Washington.
Look, we're talking. Look, Mark. I'm talking about. Look, we're all at the dinner table now. Y'all may have had a nice piece of steak.
What did he say? He said, "I am too."
Yeah. We're all at the dinner table. Y'all have a nicer piece of steak for sure. I'm just saying, look, we're all haven't gotten the final prize, right? I think most years Georgia, Alabama have had the dessert. We just kind of had a little bit of the taste of dinner, and I'm trying to work on an analogy on the fly. It may not be working, but the point is that there is typically a gap between one, two, and then three and four. That's all I'm trying to say. And I feel good about Michigan's chances getting in that 3 and 4 spot, but to be legitimate, a legitimate contender to win a national title, they're talking about being a 1 or 2 seed, and I've had a hard time seeing Michigan have all those things go their way. Dominating the season the way they would need to get their 1 or 2 seed, and then having the personnel, not only from the start, the first stringers, but the second stringers as well, where you're like, man, you know, like case in point, we lose Blake Corn? Do we have, and ironically we do, we have a really good running back behind him in Dalvin Numbers, right? What's our receiver depth like? Do we have the speed and depth at linebacker? Do we have the disruptive pass rushers to get to a quarterback? You know what I'm saying? So those are the things that I just worry about. And where I'm like, man, I just can never see a legitimate opportunity for Michigan to break through. But, hey, I guess one thing this past weekend has shown me is that anybody can be beat, especially Alabama. I mean, Alabama looked the most pedestrian and vulnerable that I think I've ever seen them. The way they looked in Austin. So hey, maybe this is one of those wacky years where you can get somebody who you wouldn't expect to go all the way and win a championship.
Mark, looks like you had something you wanted to chime in with.
Oh, he always has
he's
something.
getting some ammo ready for you, Dre.
And I don't like. I'm actually kind of scared because like once he like hears something and he gets triggered, he kind of writes it down, and I'm like he starts to hit me over the head with something. But go ahead, Mark. I'm waiting.
No, just pretty much the same. So you don't believe that Michigan's ceiling is the national championship. You believe that they should probably be able to make it to the playoff, but as a 3 or 4 seed, and because of the history that you're outlining, which I don't 100% agree with, but I get your point. I think it's generally true about the separation within the playoff. That Michigan's going to be giving a similar season to what they did last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no. I mean, I just view that number one seed, like the team that wins the national title every year. It's really the half and half nots, and I don't believe there's any team in the history of the college football playoff where you looked at the national champion and you didn't say, you know what, yeah, they were heads and shoulders. They were clearly the best team, right? Like I don't think there were any upsets in a college football playoff, right? When Alabama beat Georgia a few years ago, when Tua took over at halftime, I would have thought everyone. I had to go back and recheck the line, but I'm pretty sure Alabama was favored in that game. Now Georgia was ahead of them. Georgia was winning that game, but at the end of the day, the cream rolls to the top, right? And I have a hard time ever looking at Michigan and thinking, man, based on our roster, we're better than Georgia, definitively. We're better than Alabama, right? And it's just, especially in college football, man. Now, in the NFL, you can have comparable rosters. You may even be not quite as good, and you can scheme and might be able to pull out a victory against a better opponent. But in college football, man, most of the time, the cream rises to the top, and that's why I have a hard time seeing Michigan breakthrough. Now, can we get hot with recruiting and maybe change? Which just goes back to this past offseason where I was very disappointed with the lack of momentum that, and I mean, just talked about this lack of momentum that Michigan was taking advantage of. After winning the Big Ten, right, having so many things go your way, can you really pick up some of the momentum in the recruiting ranks, right? And get into the top 5 or something like that. And they still can potentially. That's why it was disappointing to see them lose out on guys like CJ Carr, where it's like, man, like here's another 5-star kid. Yeah, we got JJ, but we need to be able to reload because we're trying to take a step forward. We want to change the trajectory. We want to do new things. And that's just kind of how I look at it, You get stuck in these cycles of great, really good, and then solid programs. And it's really hard to go from one level to the other.
I don't think you're giving your program nearly enough credit because to me, the way that Georgia ran through the regular season last year, I mean, if you remember, going into the SEC championship game, Alabama had just come off of what, 4 overtime loss to Auburn, who was, I don't know, a 7-win team, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. I mean, Alabama should have lost that game. So they are legitimately limping into that SEC championship game, and a week later, they just, turn it on. Now, obviously, we know how the season ultimately ended, but there's just no way to know all of those things in week 3 of the season. And plus, what I would argue is, number one of the things to me, a prerequisite of winning a national championship is the quarterback. You've got to have the guy. Now, he may be someone that you feel is limited, whether it be Stetson Bennett or Mac Jones. Even as good of a season that Mac Jones had that 2020 season, the COVID year, athletically, I don't think he's going to blow anybody away.
You're still a first round NFL talent.
Correct. But nonetheless, you need to have a guy. And I think Michigan has that with JJ, and I think you just need a talented roster. Well, not just, but there's a talent level that you have to get to before you even have a seat at the table. And I think Michigan has that. Like I think, and to me, I'm looking at the AP poll. Michigan's number 4 right now. So if we're talking Michigan getting to that point of they're going into the Ohio State week undefeated, I mean, you're probably still going to be 4 at that point, but you're high. It's not as if Michigan is unranked right now, to where they're trying to do they have a lot of leapfrogging to do between now and the end of the season. They are there. You know what I mean? If everything stopped today, they're in the playoff. Now, obviously, a lot needs to go to happen still, but I think Michigan has everything that they need to get to, number 1, the playoff, and then also get to, to potentially win a national championship. Like you need to be playing really good football come November and December to win a national championship. That's ultimately what it comes down to, is when you're trending towards those, end of the year rivalry games, conference championships, things like that. You need to be playing your best football at that point. And the teams that win a national championship, obviously, they have those other prerequisites, a quarterback and a talent level, kind of a baseline, but they're also playing really good football at that point.
Yeah, but we're not talking about just look. I believe, and I've stated, I believe they can make the playoff. They should make the playoff this year, especially with the chaos. I mean, I think there's a chance they make the playoff, even if they lose to Ohio State. We're talking about winning a national title. See, it's the winning, not even getting there, winning a national title that I feel, as of today, is still a dream, right? I can't see Michigan having the depth and the speed and the strength and the size that is necessary. As you mentioned, how Mike Morris, when he's his size compared to the size of Hawaii, right, and how he clearly stood out. Well, Georgia and Alabama has like 4 or 5 Mike Morrises. You know what I'm saying? And so that's where it's like, man, for us to compete for 60 minutes against that type of opponent, right? Can we really do that? Like, can we really do that?
But I still would push back on that, because I would make an argument that in the SEC championship, Alabama against Georgia, if you take away those big plays, the big double move to Jamison Williams, that was a touchdown, and they had another big play, and I'm forgetting it now. But if you take those away, I mean, it's a much closer game than what the final score would say. I mean, still Alabama won the game; they beat him soundly. But I would argue yes, it is a 60-minute football game, but it's also it's not necessarily like it's big plays. That's what I would make an argument of. It's big plays, and I think you've got a quarterback to make them. You've got the receiving core to make them, and defensively, you have the defense and the defenders to stop them and or limit them. How about that? Because nowadays with college football, it's you just can't stop anybody really. It's just limiting them the as
Well,
much
you
as
can
you
stop
can.
Iowa. You can stop
So,
Iowa. You know,
well, there. Okay, you're going to see Iowa in the college football playoff to
no,
get to the
I'm just
national
saying, like, you
championship.
can't stop anybody. You can
Right.
stop Iowa. You can't
Well,
stop
Well,
them.
Iowa stops themselves, I
yeah,
would argue,
exactly.
but
It's not anyone stopping Iowa. It's they're the
but
common
I think Michigan's I think they have the formula, the blueprint. Like it may not be it may not look exactly the same, but I mean I would argue too, like that LSU defense with the year 2019 with Joe Burrow. That wasn't an elite defense. They played very well at times,
But hold on a
but they
second,
just
Des.
went out and outscored people.
But they had an historically. Oh, sorry, guys. Oh,
You do what you need to do, man.
Yep. Yeah, but you're going to tell me they had a historical, offense, and I agree with that. But in the first 2 weeks of the season, they didn't look very historical. They looked really impressive, but I think they beat Texas. What was that, 35-28, something like that? That was a close game. Like that wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might have been a little bit wrong, but I mean, it wasn't. They didn't drop 60 on Texas. They dropped 60 on Oklahoma at halftime in the playoff. So but that's exactly my argument, though. You've got to play your best ball in November and December, and that's what they did. They had the Alabama game. I think that might have been October, but nonetheless, once we got down the stretch with that LSU team, I mean, people were looking at it like, yeah, I mean, this offense, Joe Burrow, I mean, he was the talk of the town, running away with the Heisman. I mean, that's legitimately it. That's what you need to happen. And you can make an argument that I don't think JJ's any less talented than Joe Burrow is. You may say the intangibles, things like that Joe Burrow has that was truly, truly special. But JJ's no less talented than Joe Burrow is.
No. Yeah, I would agree with that. But I was processing exactly what just came out of your mouth right at the end. Just Joe Burrow and other guys that we could think of, Deshaun Watson, having intangibles that match the elite talent. Just obviously having that poise, that swag, that ability to lead, making their best throws when it matters the most, those sorts of things. Yeah. We'll see if JJ's got that.
Yeah. And it's early, but when we were on the post game at 1 a.m. on Sunday, but it was very clear that when JJ came out of the game and Cade came in, it's hard to describe, but it just seemed like the air just kind of got sucked out of the balloon. Like there just wasn't the same amount of like just excitement, and Dre likes to use the term juice a lot, in which I actually agree. Just wasn't the same juice when Cade came in, and I wonder if the team is at the point of like they could see the writing on the wall, like JJ's going to be the starter. So that excitement when you have a guy in there who can take off for a 40-yard touchdown run and just do dynamic things with the ball. I'm wondering if we're seeing maybe the beginnings of kind of what you mentioned, Mark, with the Joe Burrow, the Deshaun Watson, that confidence that you have from your teammates where they're going to play just a little bit harder. They're going to block just a little bit longer. They're going to run a little bit harder because they have the guy at quarterback. So I wonder if we're seeing the beginnings of that.
well, obviously, my daughter did not appreciate some of my take. If you heard a baby scream, that
She's
was
smart.
her.
Less than a year old, already smart and understanding that Uncle Dez is correct. That's what she's
Yeah,
understanding.
I think so too. But no, Des, look, man, look. There's nothing. And be very clear. There's nothing more that I would like to be able to come up here and say, hey, Michigan has what it takes to win a national title. Very similar to last year. Look, I have I have to see it to believe it type of mentality. And even though, like, I see what a lot of people's arguments are. Hey, you have a great quarterback. A great quarterback can make magic happen, right? They can take a good team and make them great, right? Well, I don't think a great quarterback can make a good team great. I think a great quarterback can hide certain deficiencies that a good team has. And even though that is the case, what I worry about is fine. Let's say JJ is special And overall, Michigan as a team is a really good team, and JJ is a great quarterback. But what happens when you play a team that has a good quarterback, and it is amazing, like Georgia? Then you're like, well, hold on a second now. Michigan's found a way to put up 30 points, but we've given up 35. Or, Michigan's finding a way to stay in the game, but, after a while, that speed starts to break us down. See, that's what I'm worried about. And, like, can we really, really compete on that level and the consistency for 60 minutes? You can come out. Look, MSU looked pretty good for a half versus Alabama, right? They looked competitive in 2015 against Alabama in the playoff. I think they were down with 14-0 at halftime. It was a very
Not
competitive
even.
game. MSU didn't look like they were about to get blown off the field, but you saw at this, third, fourth quarter, the talent and the cream start to rise to the top. And, Connor Cook was, a really good college quarterback. Not great, but really good. So, I
But
mean,
I would
look,
make an argument even in that game. I watched every snap of that game, and to
I bet
me,
you
it
did.
was very clear that Michigan State was holding on by a thread. They were literally just holding on by a thread in that game. You knew it was coming. Like the wave was definitely coming. You just didn't know when it was going to happen. And they punted to Cyrus Jones, and there it went. So I don't know, man. I think you're selling your team short. That's how I feel.
Yeah, but let's be very clear. Let's not put me into a corner. I think we're really, really good, right? And I think we're good enough to make the playoff. Guys, once again, so Drayson was negative. I think we're really good and we're going to make the playoff. I think we should. But in terms of winning a national title, gotta see more. That's it. All right. Cadets would love to put me in the corner. Yeah, Dre doesn't think you guys are good enough. That's not what I said.
That is what you said. No. That I didn't say you. I asked you if all the breaks go their way, because in a what is it, 14, 15 game season, you gotta have a little bit of luck. You gotta have some bounces go your way. That fumble that if the other team recovers, the game is over. Somehow an O lineman or a tight end falls out. Like, you got to have some breaks go your way. But my question to you was, what's Michigan's ceiling if the breaks go your way? If you don't lose your number one receiver in Ronnie Bell, right? Like, what is the ceiling? You told me basically last year, rinse and repeat. That's what you told me.
Yeah, and there's no shame in that. I mean, like, look, man, you got to crawl before you walk, baby. And right now, we
Oh my gosh, you're driving me
take our
crazy
first
right
real
now.
steps.
Was last year not crawling? I would actually say that is legitimately the crawl before you walk. That's
Yes,
literally it.
but if you're asking me if we're ready to walk, I'm not so sure.
Okay.
That's all I'm
I
saying.
can live with that, but
That's
crawl
all I'm
before you walk. I'm
saying.
like, well, LSU didn't. They sure as heck did not.
Look,
They came out of the womb and took
brother,
off running, sprinting.
let me tell you something. You can combine Connecticut, Colorado State, and Hawaii, and you can put them all together with their best starters, and Michigan will look like they're ready to win a national title. Okay, those teams will make anybody look amazing. So, like, let me just see a little bit more. And unfortunately, look, they can't control that. The players can control who they're playing, right? They just have to go out there and do their jobs. But at the end of the day, in terms of gauging what's the trajectory of how far they can go, that remains to be seen. And like you said, Des, we may not know until they finally play Ohio State. Or rather, can this team do something really special like that? Right? Other than that, who knows? I mean, it's a really good chance MSU can go out here and get embarrassed versus Washington. I don't know who they are. I don't have a gauge on how good Penn State is. They struggled versus Purdue earlier in week one. So, I mean, we just don't know. We don't know. And you can argue that Jeff Brown blew that game for Purdue, and Penn State should have lost. So, I mean, for God's sakes, man. I mean, I don't know. Look at Wisconsin; they're flundering. I mean, just it's. I don't know. I mean, I doubt it's the Big Ten is getting that good, or it's just the Big Ten having kind of an off year.
I don't know, man. I feel like every point you make, I am just like, I don't know. It's difficult. I think they have enough. That's what I'll say. Mark, do you have anything to add?
I really don't. You guys might as well just carry on to the next topic. I got nothing for you.
Oh, well, have to highlight the super chat. One Scoop John is a regular viewer. Thank you so much. It's here all the time. Says, I think our ceiling is a national title this year with JJ. Remember, he looked good even against Georgia, who won, but we need a ton of help.
That was
Dre,
on.
your thoughts?
So you love setting me up. You just like we're still playing golf. You're putting me on that tee so you could just hit a nice drive, huh? Okay, it's okay. Except what people need to know is that you were slicing all over the place. Anyway,
We really gonna do that?
yeah, no, we're not.
Okay, because you are
Yeah,
correct. Yes, I was
no,
slicing all over the place, but
I was slicing
I
more than
don't
you
think
were.
you weren't either.
No. I was slicing more than you were. But no, yeah, and we're not putting up the score, guys. So don't even ask. Don't bother. We're both not good. Anyway,
That
um,
is a true statement.
yeah. You know, I want to throw this out there, a retort to that. That's because, for one, to answer that question, that was kind of during garbage times. That's why it's kind of a little bit hard to gauge. Clearly, JJ did bring a new dynamic in that Georgia game, right? That at least got you thinking, well, maybe if he starts this game, how different could we have looked, right? We definitely would have brought a different element. Now, could that resulted in a better score? Potentially, but I don't know. I mean, I understand what one scoop is saying. It's definitely worth talking about, but, you know, we'll see. But, I want to ask you guys this, right? We just had this past weekend was an incredible week of upsets and surprises out of Texas A&M and Notre Dame. I think those were the two biggest surprises of the week. Um, who do you think bounces back quickest? Because I believe that this week is Notre Dame could be on the precipice of a collapse if they don't get it right this week, and not just win, but win in a convincing fashion.
So Texas A&M and Notre Dame, you said, are the two who bounces back sooner.
No, I'm asking. Look, I think they were out of all the upsets and the surprises, right? Like we saw Wisconsin lose at home, we saw Nebraska lose at home, right? Versus inferior opponents. We saw A&M get beat by App State. We saw, and of course, Notre Dame get beat by Marshall. I mean, I'm picking both Notre Dame and Texas A&M as my biggest surprises, the bigger upsets of the weekend. So, out of those two teams, between A&M and Notre Dame, who do you think bounces back?
I will let Mark go first because I'm actually going to cheat and look at schedules.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go. I just think Notre Dame is playing a more forgiving schedule. I don't think it's easy, but I think it's more forgiving than Texas A&M.
Notre Dame has Cal at home on Saturday. Let's see. And Texas A&M was the other.
You got Miami.
Yep.
So, and you got two very different dynamics in that you've got a first-year head coach who should have a honeymoon and should have a mulligan and all those cliches about some time, some patience. And then you got Jimbo Fisher, who's had a Brinks truck of money dumped on his head, and he's in his fifth year, and he should be performing much better than they are. And they haven't even touched the SEC. They haven't touched what was supposed to be their most difficult non-conference game or gotten into the SEC, and he's already lost a game. He lost games last year that Texas A&M, based on, again, recruiting and resources, aren't supposed to lose to Mississippi State and Ole Miss and Arkansas. And so I don't know if this answers the question. I think that Notre Dame's issues are more understandable, more tolerable than Texas A&M's.
I mean, I'm just gonna look directly at just the schedule because winning cures a lot and puts a lot of deodorant on stinky things.
I've heard that.
I'm gonna go with Notre Dame just because they have Cal, flying in from West Coast. I think that showed a 2:30 kick. So yeah, I'm gonna go with Notre Dame, but there. I mean, Jimbo's not in any real pressure, any issue with that contract that he had, that he signed. Like, essentially, you don't really have a choice on firing him. I mean, I would imagine that his buyout is something close to what his contract is. Like, that's a guaranteed deal, but there may be a little bit of relief for the school, but I mean, Jimbo's not going anywhere, and I saw, I believe yesterday on Josh Pate late kick show, he mentioned that basically Jimbo's running a 2014 offense and refuses to change it, and until he changes things, it's probably going to be what Texas A&M has always been, which is 8-4, and nothing's going to change if he doesn't change with kind of the times. But yeah, I think with Notre Dame, that was a really tough loss, but I just think that I think they'll bounce back sooner, but I think both of these teams could potentially have a bit of a rough season. I think Notre Dame was probably a little, at least, overrated when it comes to just kind of the AP poll, but we'll see. They're going to get plenty of knocks or at bats to see if they are not. But I mean, as of today, everybody's saying that they're overrated because you lost to Marshall. So
yeah, it turns some time into Michigan. I brought this up, I believe, on a post game show. It's now look, App State's biggest program win was clearly the Michigan win in 2007. And now they have another one on the road. And I actually think that for Texas A&M fans, the Michigan upset back in 07 helped, might ease it a little bit, the pain a little bit, because you've seen their program do it before. Granted, a long time ago, so it's not like it hasn't happened to anybody. But it's just, I guess, like it's the optics of Marshall, doing that to a program like Notre Dame in their house, that I think is just incredible. So I don't know, man. It's interesting, and it's one of those things, guys, as Michigan fans, where you look at a weekend like this past weekend, you're like, man, you know what? No matter what kind of concerns I might have about my own team, we're in a really good spot, right? And, in terms of the haves and have-nots for heading the right direction and having legitimate talent, having at least a really good quarterback under center, no matter who it is, we're feeling pretty good about where we're going. So, hey, I think Michigan fans should feel more comfortable than some Alabama fans are, So, I mean, that was a rough performance versus Texas. So, I hope you guys are starting to get that feeling like I was this past weekend, that, when you really look around the country, Michigan's in a really good spot. Michigan's in a really good spot. And I think they have the chemistry. I think they have the right energy right now. They're rallying around their quarterback and J.J. McCarthy. And look, that's all you really can ask for. And they're taking care of business,
Yeah, I think they'll be I think Michigan will be fine. I'm wondering if that schedule is just not. We'll see what Penn State does in Michigan State, but if Michigan State goes and loses because they play Washington, right? This weekend.
Yes.
I mean, if they lose that game, yikes! You just wonder if that schedule is going to potentially be almost a hindrance for Michigan. Like you said, there's been years where the ACC was bad and Clemson just rolled through it, and when they went against top tier competition, they had no problems and were kicking butt. But you just wonder that if a one-loss Michigan team that doesn't go to the Big Ten championship will be able to get in the playoff if the schedule in fact does end up where you have one ranked team on the schedule, because Antoine puts here, even if Michigan loses to Ohio State, they still might have a chance that they'll make the playoffs. Alabama's struggling also, and they absolutely will have a shot, absolutely, and it just will, it'll just depend, like, how do the chips lay, who's at 5, who's at 6, do those teams win? So it could be one of those things where they end up getting there and they get the nod. There's really no way to know until you get there. But I think with that in mind, I know Harbaugh overall, his MO usually isn't run up the score, but you might want to kind of run the score up on basically everybody that you can, because it looks different if you beat, Maryland by 30 and beat, you know what I mean, beat these other teams by
Right.
30 and 40 points, where, a committee is going to say, well, yeah, I see they didn't win, obviously we, lost Ohio State. That was a close game. But I mean, look at everybody else that they play. I mean, they just throttled everybody. They are one of the four best teams, right? So
Right.
that's a little bit of the foresight too. That's kind of the difficult part of being a head coach. And when you're talking about big time football, is those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, what that final score needs to say is that you are head and shoulders better than your opponents every week, right? It's like it's not even close, right? And you're separating yourself from just like, oh, they're a good team, they're winning every week. No, 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 they're bombing teams, right? They are showing that they have they're special. They're not just good, right? That's what that final score needs to indicate. Pretty much, if your opponents are weaker on a week to week basis. So look, um, it's interesting, man. I'm kind of looking at some of the comments, and I think that yeah, I mean Georgia's kind of like the untouchable for me right now. I just and the reason why, guys, let me explain why I'm saying that. I don't want to just say that and you guys think I'm just saying it just because. Well, for one, they're coming off winning the national title, and I think number two is they've had the most impressive victory out of any team thus far. Now that can change. That can change. But I think winning the national title and having the most impressive victory of this season so far is why I think that they are the clear number one. And I'm not sure any of us, including Alabama, is ready to take that on right now. Now that can change. Michigan can keep getting better. The more JJ plays and starts, he can look even more sharp, and his offense may look different than they've ever looked before. So, I mean, I don't know, and maybe they'll change my perspective. But as of now, I just think Georgia is the clear. There's Georgia, and then there's everybody else, right? And then we'll see from there.
Yeah, yeah, Georgia, they are just throttling people. And here, I think here's the good and bad thing with college football is if Oregon goes on to lose their next 3 games, then that score is not going to look as impressive, right? But if Oregon is midway through the season competing for the Pac-12, whatever division they play in, I don't even know. But if they're competing for that, then it still holds its weight. But if they just fall off a cliff, I mean, that's not going to look as impressive as it does today, because that looks like a very impressive win. So we'll see what happens. It's that's why I think college football is awesome, is because when you have young people, trying to get them to stay focused and play at the same level just consistently is very difficult to do, and the elite coaches definitely need to be commended, because that's a really tough thing to do.
I mean, if you're Oregon, I mean, look, that before Utah played against Florida, that loss to Georgia was incredibly crushing. But look, now Utah has one loss. Now, granted, both of y'all losses weren't in your conference, but you still have a legitimate chance to win your conference. And I mean, and who knows what will happen. So, look, I mean, Oregon has a lot to play for. I mean, I will hope and that they kind of, for their sake, to kind of fix things and go forward. You don't want to see, Oregon or Utah fall off. I mean, it's good to have at least some kind of representative in the Pac-12 to be respectable, right?
You don't care about that. Stop it. You don't care about that.
I don't.
Be honest. You don't care anything about that.
I just want to be. I just want to be right. I just want to be right. Honestly, that's really what it's about. And I want the Georgia win to mean something, because then it makes my case about Georgia being great. Anyway, you know what I'm trying to say. Thanks for calling me out.
But D Brown had posted a question, and it was, I thought, very good.
Oh, our favorite guy, D Brown.
Basically put, who would you rather have for the next, here it is. If you had to pick between Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, or JJ to be your quarterback for the next 5 years, who would you pick? And I'm assuming we're talking about NFL. What is your take on this, Trey?
even though I worry about his size, Bryce Young, Bryce Young, and the reason why is I've seen Bryce, man, CJ too, but I just feel like Bryce has like that it factor, man. And that's not to say CJ isn't good. He's really good. He has a really good arm. But I know Bryce seems to be, he has like that magic to his game, right? Like things break down, and not only is he able to improvise and make time in and out the side of the pocket, but he's able to throw uh, with tremendous accuracy and has just like a poise to him. I've seen CJ get rattled a couple times. I don't know if I've ever seen Bryce get rattled. Right. And then also, I think this year will be telling as well. I mean, CJ still has an embarrassment of riches. And last year, and at least last week versus Texas, there are some people asking, well, who's the true number one receiver for Alabama this year? And Bryce still found the way to get it done. So I'll go with Bryce Young. I think he has like that it factor, right? I think CJ's very talented. They're both very talented, but I think Bryce has the it factor.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very biased, and I'm aware of that. But I just look at a game like number one, a game like Texas on Saturday. They were on the road. No one on offense is coming to play with him. It's just literally Bryce Young going out there trying to win the game. And if you want to say, well, Texas isn't that good, they just played that well. Okay. Well, I would also show you the Auburn game when chips were down, you're in trouble. I mean, that drive he had when they were on the 2-yard line, 1 or 2 yard line, and had to go 99 yards to win the game, to tie the game, I'm sorry, and then go into overtime and play after play, just continuously making plays. Also against LSU, and then in that SEC championship game against Georgia. I mean, when he had, Jamison Williams and John Mechie, his whole wide receiver crew, he was pretty darn impressive. You know what I mean? We hadn't seen anyone carve up the Georgia defense like that. And obviously in the SEC championship game, it didn't go that way. You lost John Mechie in that SEC championship game, and then you lost Jamison Williams in the national championship game. So that changes things a little bit, right? Not making an excuse. Georgia won it. Forget about that stuff. But just when you look at Bryce Young, he has been already in very, very high pressure, high leverage situations, and nothing really seems to be too much for him. And as a quarterback, I mean, we see it in the NFL with Trey Lance. Like, people are already concerned about Trey Lance, and he started this is, I think, his 3rd game starting. So yeah. To me, the intangibles are really important. And even though he is not a huge guy, I mean, I've watched probably 90% of Bryce Young's snaps, and I've never seen anybody, get a good shot on him, like kind of knock his block off to where you're concerned. You know what I mean? So it just, to me, I think Bryce is I think he's a special kid, and Antoine. So Dre, I don't know if you remember, but we had a conversation, I think yesterday or Monday. But I told Dre, I'm like, there were parts of that game where I felt sorry for Bryce Young because nobody could make a play for him. Nobody. It was just him out there just figuring out a way. I'll throw it to my running backs. I'll throw it to my tight ends. I'll run it. Like, because, Jermaine Burton was, goodness gracious, a no-show. You would have thought he was injured. Ja'Cory Brooks with an untimely drop. Now he came back, and made a big catch. But he to me, just, continued to make plays. And I've also seen him do it, in that SEC championship. Like I said, to kind of go back to that, I mean, that was a do-or-die situation. If you lose that game, you are not going to the playoff. You don't have a chance to compete for a national championship. So there was a lot there was a lot on that game.
You know who Bryce reminds me of?
What's up?
Sorry to cut you off. Who he reminds me of? He reminds me of Russell Wilson. That's what Bryce Young reminds me of.
Come on. Why would you pick him? Because
that's someone stop.
He's just not likable.
Okay, we're not talking about personality. We're not talking about personality.
I know, but still, that comes with it. When you say the name, that comes with it.
But we're talking about style and like their approach in the game, and I just think that when I say magic, I'm talking about Like, and guys, the whole Jake having JJ even in that question is too early. And as much as I would love to say, yeah, man, one through three, hey, Bryce, CJ, or JJ. I mean, I would love to have that legitimate conversation. It's just way too early. JJ has to go through a full season of proving himself. Look, I mean, it's one thing when you're evaluating JJ. It's one thing to look at the kid and say, "Wow, he checks all the boxes in terms of the intangibles: arm strength check, arm accuracy check, mobility check." But does he have the consistency week to week? Can he handle pressure? Right? All those things are proven ground that a quarterback has to verify, right? And that only happens after a legitimate sample size. We still don't know what JJ McCarthy is. We see signs, right? We see the potential, but you got to be careful before you go on throwing him in top 3 college quarterbacks right now type of. It's a projection, Dre. Dude, okay, I'm just, but, okay, fine. You're projecting JJ. You can project JJ, but hold on a second, D Brown. You're projecting JJ, but you have 2 guys who you don't need to project because they have already proven themselves, right? So one guy is a projection, 2 other guys are proving that they're already really good. So I mean, it's kind of confusing. I mean, Des, you agree with me? Because they're at different stages.
Here's Dre's Twitter account for you guys.
Dude, you are a great friend. Great friend. Thank you, man.
Oh man, no, that's good stuff. Hey man, listen, we're here to have a good time. We're having a good time. So, anyway, I think that is it for us. Thank goodness Michigan has a noon game, so we will be here about 3:30 once they wrap up, and yeah, we'll be here post game as always. So. Thanks everybody for tuning in. That is it for us. That is Dre's Twitter handle, so feel free to troll him, and I will also retweet it. So, yes, appreciate it.
Oh, Des, you are number one, my guy. You are number one.
You are right about that.
You guys take care, and we'll see you Saturday.
Peace.
Peace.